大家好，我是杨澜，欢迎收看《文化相对论》。多年来，气候变化一直在缓慢地进行。当你听到气温又上升了1/10度，或者海平面又上升了1厘米，你可能觉得这个变化很小，跟自己没有什么关系。然而，正是这些看似微小的变化不断累积，产生巨大的影响。最近，印度尼西亚已经正式宣布迁都，气候变化与地面下沉相叠加，造成了雅加达在30年后将被海水覆盖。而另外一组数据更加引人注目，那就是今天全球有超过1半的人口居住在沿海100公里的范围以内。如果我们没有办法把全球的升温控制在2度以内，那么包括上海浦东和纽约曼哈顿在内的沿海城市都有可能因为海平面的上升而被淹没。所以说，气候变化不是杞人忧天，而是迫在眉睫的危机，这需要人类完成向生态文明的转变。那今天呢，首先请允许我来介绍一下参加节目讨论的各位嘉宾。首先介绍的坐在我身边的谢振华主任，现任中国气候变化事务特使。同时呢，为您介绍清华大学国学研究院院长陈来教授。我们还有3位嘉宾呢，通过线上参加讨论。首先为您介绍的是Mr. Jerry Brown， 美国政治家。还有呢是大卫和苏珊·洛克菲勒夫妇。Welcome to you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
气候变化似乎是一个很宏大的话题，那么它和我们每一个人究竟有什么样的关系呢？在现场开始讨论之前，我们先来听听来自世界各地不同的年轻人是如何理解这个话题的。
When it snows, the snow stays for like less days and it doesn't snow as often as it used to.
From what I've noticed, the summer has gotten warmer. It's also it rains more where I'm from right now in the summer.
So I'd say from London we're very sheltered because we've got a high, we're above the sea level in the sense of if it rose by a couple of centimeters, then we wouldn't be too harshly impacted.
My parents work in agriculture, so that was especially hard because they have to work out in 100-degree plus weather. And then it's a lot harder to grow crop and actually sell it when it starts to spoil so much quicker and the weather isn't optimal for its growth.
我觉得我的衣食住行跟碳排放都挺有关系的，像我们大学生挺喜欢点外卖的，用到的一些一次性餐具啊，还有平时日常出行啊，都会有碳排放。
虽然说地球生长这么46亿年，但是其实它气温比现在高的时候就是也有很多，但它造成的都是一些物种的灭绝，所以最后应该会导致我们人类的一场生存危机。
对于年轻人的这些表达，我不知道谢主任有一些什么样的回应？
我连续10几年参加联合国气候变化大会，每次会议开始的时候呢，都有这么一个节目，全世界各地的青少年讲他们的体会，讲他们对各级政府各国政府的一些要求。随着工业化的进程，就是环境污染、生态破坏、气候变化、生物多样性的锐减，一系列的生态环境问题呢，都在相继发生。实际上呢，这是对人类的一个共同的挑战，所以我们大家呢，应该携起手来，共同努力。只有我们全球的合作才能够应对这些变化，才能解决相应的一些问题。
陈来教授本身在大学校园里经常接触到年轻人哈，你觉得他们的这种关注气候变化的这种心情是否比较迫切了？
很明显呢，比起10年以前就迫切多了。从北京来讲呢，气候变化这个引起的这个拐点呢，我觉得是在2013年，就突然北京变成雾霾非常严重的城市。你像我自己吧，我家里那一年突然就买了3台空气清新的机器，学生啊、老师啊和周围的同志啊，都对这个议论纷纷，一下呢，把这个问题变成一个大家都迫切关心的问题。我想这也好，大家都关心呢，就容易得到进一步的解决。
是的，气候变化跟我们每个人都密切相关。Mr. Brown, when did it start that you became very concerned about this issue of climate change? What were some of the incidents or changes that really touched you at the beginning?
I became governor for the first time in 1975, and at that time there was a growing awareness of ecology, of the environment, of being a very important factor. I did many things working with our lawmakers to accelerate the purchase of zero-emission vehicles, require much more efficient buildings, set a specific and very tight standard for electrical generation, requiring it to come from renewable sources. But relative to what needs to be done, it's very little. China and the U.S., as Minister Xie says, must take the lead in a collaborative way as partners.
Yeah, we'll explore into those issues later on. So Susan and David, what were some of the personal experiences?
First of all, I just want to say, Governor Brown, you're such a role model, but my interest in protecting the oceans and getting involved in climate-related issues came from really a personal place of loving nature and spending many of my formative years in the ocean. And we work, country by country to help protect our oceans and use the power of science and facts and research and advocacy to enforce fishing regulations and minimize bycatch and fish habitat.
And at one level, of course, all of us are the frogs in the hot water, not realizing that it will come to a boil and it will be intolerable. I think probably my most dramatic revelation, if you will, that things were changing was reading the work of John Muir from the 19th century, describing a place in Alaska called Glacier Bay that was essentially clogged with ice, and then ice sailing there years later, and you were able to sail almost all the way up to the shores. The glaciers were retreating, were becoming hanging glaciers instead of glaciers reaching into the ocean.
所以其实每个人都有一个被触动、被启发的时刻，真正的开始关注气候变化。
刚才这个布朗先生他要发言，这是我的老朋友，我们一起合作了将近20年，因为我从事这个工作大体上将近有40年的时间，因为工作的关系，我到过2次南极，1次北极，特别是北极，由于气候变暖，它的冰川融化，这个在边缘地区大量的坍塌，所以现在确确实实由于气候变化带来了这个一系列的经济、政治、能源、粮食、健康、
生物的多样性
一系列的问题。中美之间我们应该在这个领域合作。不光是中美，全世界都应该合作。只有合作，才能够真正的解决气候变化带来的多边问题。
And Governor Brown, do you think it is a mission possible or mission impossible to control the temperature rise within 2 degrees?
No, it's mission possible physically, financially, but is it mission possible politically? So here's the problem. Just this last year, the countries of the world spent $2 trillion on military, on armaments. That's crazy.
Yes, yeah.
And our leaders need to be perhaps awakened by others, by philosophers, by young people, by artists, so that all the leaders of the world get with it, get the awareness that will lead to the commitment. So it's there potentially,
我们今天在讨论气候变化的问题，也就不得不深入一步来讨论人和自然的关系问题。在这个方面，我们可能要深入到历史和文化当中去一探究竟。我们先通过一个短片来看看各地年轻人是如何理解人与自然的关系的。
I think humans need to be respectful of nature and really take what they need only and be sustainable about it.
I think the relationship with people and nature has to be reciprocal, right? If we take advantage of nature, we can already see some of the consequences.
我觉得应该是和谐的，但是如果说按占比的话，应该自然的比率要比人类的比率大10%到20%左右吧。
因为现在工业文明还是建立在化石能源的基础上，所以我认为最大的差距就是能源结构方面的差距。
It's important that countries learn from each other's mistakes and countries support one another in mitigating or like tackling this issue.
我觉得我们人与自然应该成为一个共生共荣的命运共同体，这是习主席所说的。
好，听了这个年轻人们的一些这个讨论哈，我想首先问一下陈来教授哈，从您看来，从中国历史的发展当中，有哪些我们中国的古老的一些智慧能够给我们带来一些启迪的？
其实中国文明呢，很早就关注到生态平衡的这些问题，它很早呢就已经有了认识，而且提出了一些对策。孟子就讲呢，这个是吧？斧斤呢，以时入山林，就是你带着斧头不能一年四季就可以上林子里边去，只能有某些时节规定的一定的时节，才能到山林里边去砍伐。这个就是要维护这个山林的生态平衡，取之有度，用之有节。中华文明这个有时有度有节。
您觉得这和中华文明数千年来没有间断这样持续的发展，有什么样的内在联系呢？
我觉得这个就是呢，就是他在这个古代文明的时候呢，他建立了一套这个人与自然和谐相处的自然观，这是最根本的。那第二点呢，就是道法自然，它主要讲的人应该这个顺应遵循。自然的这个发展。如果说前面两个分别来自这个儒家和道家，那佛教也提供了它的一些这个重要的观念，比如说这个众生平等，就是说他们都有自己的内在价值。那就应该呢我们对这些事物呢，人和自然万物呢都平等相待。所以这些呢都是中华文明里边常见的生态的这个理念。
Well, I know that Susan and David, you have been traveling around the world. What are some of the wisdoms that we can draw the inspiration from?
Yes, I think both of us have been lucky enough to develop good friendships within the indigenous communities, a number of them in the US, in my case, both in California, in Hawaii, and Alaska. And it is remarkable, as we have just heard, really the wisdom that comes from the ancients, but we have not always been listening. And of course, there are many very sad cases in the US and Canada too, of how Christian culture and Western culture has tried to suppress the indigenous native wisdom that comes from people whose livelihood traditionally. And I think it's so wonderful that we're having this conversation about Confucianism and about indigenous knowledge across the Pacific, because there is so much to learn.
Governor Brown, what are some of the reflections on the process of industrialization or so-called modernization has brought to us? What's the cost we have paid?
Well, first of all, the industrial age has brought forth prosperity. That's one side. But you have to then look at the other side, and that is that the basis of the comfort and the prosperity is oil and gas and coal. And those three products those resources also drive climate change. The key point is we are not robots. We are not machines. We are part of nature. I had the term, if I say it right, wu wei, nothing against the grain. Well, in our modern world, almost everything is against the grain. So we need a very big change.
Thank you. So we're talking about the change of the mindset. 谢主任对刚才几位嘉宾的这个观点，能不能进行一下回应哈？
我赞成。首先，这个工业文明，它给人类社会带来了繁荣，所以它是高消耗、高排放、高污染，这个最后呢带来了现在造成的环境污染、生态破坏、气候变化、这个海洋的酸化以及这个生物多样性的锐减。因此提出来了，全球有一个共识，提出来一个可持续发展的这么一个理念，或者是一种模式，它就是经济社会环境，它是三大支柱。但是对中国来说呢，我们提出了一个生态文明的思想，就是除了经济社会环境之外，我们又加了政治和文化，也就是刚才布朗先生讲的，要想解决这个问题，在政治层面要有政治意愿，然后呢，他加以领导，建立制度，建立机制，来保证可持续发展。
中国的领导人呢也提出了2030年碳达峰和2060年这个碳中和的这样的双碳的目标哈。对于生态成本的转移，这意味着什么？
在这个气候问题上呢，中国基本的理念，这个是习主席讲，所以中国应对气候变化，这不是别人让我们做，而是我们自己要做。为什么呢？这是中国要实现可持续发展、高质量发展内在的要求，也是我们那个应对全球气候变化的挑战，中国应该承担起这种大国的担当。所以这是由我们自发的这个要来解决这个问题。
打断一下，曾经有人说这个是不是这个西方要限制中国发展的某种陷阱或者阴谋？您怎么看？
这个是30年河东，30年河西。过去讲气候变化，有人讲这是西方这个限制发展国家的陷阱。可是特朗普总统上台之后，他退出了巴黎协定，他提出来气候变化这个命题是中国的陷阱，这是中国的阴谋。实际上呢都不对。这是这个全球这个由于工业化带来的这个出现的问题、出现的挑战、出现的危机，大家呢都应该共同的面对。怎么面对呢？就是要转型，要创新。现在看中国，我们超额完成了这个我们所确定的这个目标。在这个期间，中国的 GDP 增长了4倍，我们有1亿农村的贫困人口脱贫。在这个过程当中呢，我们通过这个节能提高能源的利用效率，相当于在这个过程当中减少了57.9亿吨的二氧化碳的排放。另外一个概念呢，中国的可再生能源，也就是光伏发电或者是太阳能发电，占了全球的33%。这样的话，就是中国大力的发展可再生能源，这是对全球在发展可再生能源，中国做的非常突出的、
实实在在的一个
突出的贡献。大家讲交通领域要减排，交通领域减排很重要的就是交通工具，发展电动汽车。中国的电动汽车的生产量、销售量、保有量，占了全球的52%。所以这个在这一点上呢，应该说，中国走了这么一条探索的一条绿色低碳这个循环发展的这么一条路。中国现在要如果这么做的话，我们会这个创新出一些新的产业，增加新的就业机会，而且这些就业机会呢，它是体面的就业机会。我们算了算，可能要6000万到7000万人要在这个领域。
So Governor Brown, do you have any questions to address to Minister Xie?
Well, I was just wondering if Mr. Xie has had recent discussions with his counterpart in the United States, namely John Kerry. the envoy on climate change from America.
谢主任来透露一点儿。
在气候变化领域，我们始终保持着联系。你比如说，在这个特朗普总统宣布退出巴黎协定之后，我们两个人实际上在这个期间有3次活动。第一个，我们建立了中国跟加州的这个我们联合研究院；第二个，我们在旧金山18年召开了气候行动峰会，我们你我还有这个布伦伯格先生，我们都做联合主席，推动了全球的城市的市长、企业家、科学家、NGO 要开始合作。在那个会上，我见了17个州的州长。第3次是我们在纽约，2019年，我们要召开一个气候行动峰会。我印象非常深，你在进手术室之前，一定要给我打一个电话。我当时在纽约的大街上接了你的电话，我们俩在商量，我们怎么样在现在这种双边关系的情况之下，我们在气候变化领域，我们如何合作，而且把我们的峰会要开好。刚才您讲了，我跟克里先生，我们的这个交流呢，我们已经合作了将近20年。我和克里先生加起来150多岁，咱们俩加起来也是150多岁。我们能够到这个年纪还在关心着这件事儿，来推动这件事儿，应该说呢，我们都有共同的理念，就是为了我们这个地球的未来，为了我们子孙后代的福祉。因为我们有这个共识，有这个理念，我们才能够坐下来谈，来交流，而且呢，我们要促进双方的合作。
Absolutely, Governor Brown.
Yes.
I believe that the joint efforts to combat climate change is not a zero-sum game, but also it creates new opportunities for collaboration and development. How have you seen the significance of collaboration and dialogue in this difficult time?
Well, one thing I see that Minister Xie and John Kerry are working together, are speaking on a regular basis, and now are going to meet in a third country. All that's to the good. I would like to see our two presidents, President Xi and President Biden, meet more often, and some of the other important leaders of our two countries. I know China uses the phrase win-win. As Minister Xi mentioned a little while ago, we've created together the California-China Climate Institute. I think we can say that we have to do much more, much faster in reducing carbon emissions.
Well, thank you very much. And Susan and David, we know that to avoid the tragedy of the common, we don't just need the collaborations and dialogues between governments or the politicians. We need the participation of our communities, civic societies, every stakeholder. So how have you observed the increased collaboration dialogue between the civil societies across the world?
Well, I want to say that I think you need everybody at the table. I would say that one area that is very important, especially in the United States, is the non-governmental organizations, the NGO. And we've seen a lot of innovation.
Yeah, and I would add to that the private sector can be very experimental, can take risks that most often government agencies are less willing to take. So I think there's a great opportunity, frankly, both in science and culture, as well as philanthropy.
陈来教授，其实我们在谈到这个对话、沟通和合作的这个层面，我们不仅在形成政治和经济上的一种共识，我们也在文化和伦理上正在形成一些共识。您能不能从这个角度也来谈一下？
这100年来是吧，全世界是吧，都是追求这种西方这个发达国家所代表的这个现代文明，但是很明显就是现代文明并不能自发地产生这个生态文明， 所以生态文明的建立呢，需要有更广阔、更多元的文化视野，尤其是呢，要回到一些古老文明的那些深刻的理念。中国2000多年以前呢，庄子呢已经提出万物与我为一这样的观念，就是讲万物一体。所以万物一体呢是2000多年来中国人的一个深入人心的观念，那就是人和其他人不仅是一体的，是吧？那么人和万物也是构成一个生命的共同体，至少从儒家伦理的范围来讲，不是仅仅适用于人作为对象，一定要把这个伦理的边界这个范围扩大到物。
英文当中就是 compassion
所以这个呢，在儒家伦理院就是很强调对物的这种仁爱，就把人和自然和万物的关系从伦理的层面加以推展。我觉得呢，要从这点来看呢，应该是呢，中国文明这生态文明的基础的观念做出的一点贡献吧。
非常感谢你这个给我们分享，这从伦理的角度责任和爱的角度，我们来谈气候变化的应对。谢主任，我也知道，其实在这个联合国气候变化的这个讨论上，大家因为各个国家有不同的利益，其实还是会有一些观点的不同，一些争论，甚至有一些冲突和矛盾产生的。比如说我在看到 Christiana Figueres 女士，她在写到这个 The Future We Choose 我们共同选择的未来的时候，她就说当时在2014年在利马的会议当中，每当会议陷入僵局的时候，她的那个门上就出现轻轻的敲门声，她说那一定是谢先生来了而且他会带来一些新的解决方案。就是如何我们在这些不同的利益产生矛盾和冲突的时候，用一种智慧去化解，找到共赢之道的您能给我们分享几个故事吗？
这个气候变化的一个多边进程它的原则是公开透明，这个缔约方驱动，协商一致的原则。那也就是说，所有做出的任何决定，是所有的缔约方不论大小，他都有这一票否决。所以在这一点上呢，它各有各的利弊。有将近200个缔约方，如果就一个问题这个达成一个共识，确实很难。所以我参加了14次了这个缔约国大会，都是作为中国代表团的团长，没有一次会不脱会的。最后脱会的最长的时间是46个小时。实际上脱会的这30-40个小时里边，大家都不睡觉了，都在那儿磨，去找到解决方案。所以在这个过程当中呢，确确实实的需要有些国家要拿出一些搭桥方案，也就是说找到各方分歧的一个着陆区，让大家呢来找到一个解决的方案。实际上呢，习主席在巴黎气候大会时跟我讲，说你们要做工作，要怎么做呢？要把各方的最极端的意见去做极端意见的工作，让大家往中间靠。这样的话呢，实际上就是中庸之道，就找到最大的公约数，这就是中国的文化。不光是那次会，每次会到最后脱堂的时候，联合国秘书长、大会主席还有公约的执秘都找中国代表团，能不能你们给出个主意，看看怎么办？因为什么呢？中国在这个问题上是完全开放的，和所有的国家我们都有非常畅通的对话的这个交流的机制。就是巴黎协定来说呢，中美的第一个联合声明解决了利马会的问题，为巴黎协定奠定了基础。第二个联合声明实际上就解决了巴黎协定里的所涉及到的问题，几乎是都在我们第二个联合声明里都找到了。在这个过程当中，我们做了欧盟，做了这个基础4国，就是印度、巴西、南非的工作。最后呢，大家都形成了共识，这巴黎协定最后就产生了达成了。达成之后，中美发了第3个联合声明，一下子就有160多个国家都签署了，这就离达成就是很有
引领性，
生效就有作用了。
对，而且真的让我们看到了 一个中国的智慧哈，这种中庸啊、平和、包容的这样的一种协调各方利益的智慧，而且真的应了那句话，事在人为啊，我们还是可以去做出一些努力和带来一些实质的改变的那其实接下来呢，我们要通过一个小片啊，看看各国的这个年轻人，他们想为改变气候变化做一些什么有一些什么样的观点来跟我们分享我们愿意为气候变化的应对来买单吗？
大概1000千克。
我之前做过一个简单的一个统计吧，就是我一年下来大概是11吨左右，就平均是一天30千克的二氧化碳排放量。
I pay over £100 per month for my electricity bill.
I live with 3 other people, but for 4, we pay around £70, I think.
我家每个月200，夏天开空调300多，差不多。
我认为在4到5块钱以内的范围之内，我都是可以接受的。
If I knew that it was being generated via solar or wind power, I would pay whatever it costs, probably, yeah, whatever it needed in a monthly increase, just because, someone's got to do it.
网上来说，就是人造肉的营养价值好像没有就是天然的那种肉更高。
I've tried artificial meat as a replacement, and it's actually quite tasty. My father is a fan, and so am I.
It was more or less the same as regular authentic meat.
应该没有吧？我吃了，我可能也不知道。
其实区别并不是特别大吧，但是因为它的卖点和噱头本身就是说环保嘛，或者说对肉食、对动物的一个保护，所以还是可以接受。
其实我们可以看到人们的思想意识或者说人们的观念正在发生着显著的变化。那在这个阶段呢，我们想来讨论一下解决的方案。我们先来看看每一年人类排放的温室气体是由怎样的一些部分组成的。Of course, different countries and different regions may have different situations. Like California, as I understand, transportation is the biggest greenhouse gas emission source. Is that right, Governor?
Yes. It's when you take all costs in producing cars and trucks and buses, maybe even trains, and then all the people burning oil or gas to make those cars and vehicles go forward, it's 50%. So California is committed by 2035 to have zero emission from all its cars.
But Governor, is there a sense of frustration when you see that the charging stations for clean energy in California has only reached 19,000, although you wish to set the target at 250,000?
We have a long way to go. Frustrated, I'm worried America's using too much oil, that we're having too many cars that burn gasoline. We have a long way to go. If you want to be frustrated, I can be frustrated by everybody, but I'd rather look creatively at what can be done. And so much can be done with technology and with a new awareness of how to live in the world in a more harmonious way. So we're not there yet. We're not even close, but we can get there. I have great confidence in that.
David and Susan, as we know that the Rockefeller family achieved its wealth originally from the oil industry. So how has the family divested into clean energy despite of this origin of the wealth?
My great-grandfather, who found the Standard Oil companies that had impact both in the West and in China, and it was a revolution in energy at the time, and a great gift, frankly, to mankind. What neither he nor anybody at the time realized is as population grew and as energy demand grew, it would have such deleterious impact on the environment. But that's something that's very clear to his great-grandchildren and great-great-grandchildren, who now have persuaded the philanthropic foundations that were created from oil money to divest themselves. Several of them have, the Rockefeller Foundation, the Rockefeller Brothers Fund, the Rockefeller Family Fund, are all but completely divested of fossil fuel stocks because we believe that the reality looked at from today is that those are bad long-term investments, certainly for the planet and ultimately for the shareholders as well. I think my great-grandfather would be proud of his progeny for doing this.
Understood. 谢主任，其实刚才那个 Brown 州长也提到了这个煤炭的问题。那我们也注意到，中国领导人呢已经承诺呢不在海外兴建新的煤电项目。但是就煤炭而言，在中国的能源结构当中，还是一个压舱石的一个地位。所以您觉得这个世界还需要听到的声音或者了解的情况是怎样的呢？
刚才这个视频上把这个排放的结构这个显示出来，它主要是消费端。实际上从这个供给端呢，实际上它大头还是能源活动这个造成的排放。现在 IPCC 做了一个评估，现在就是2020年，全球的温升已经是1.1度了。如果不采取措施的话，人们排放的空间只有15年到30年左右了。所以说，你必须要采取措施，才能够实现这个目标，就是把不可能变成可能。
太艰巨了哈。
对，那你就得必须要转型和创新。转型首先要在能源要转型，所以我们讲能源要进行一场变革。习主席讲不是变革，是革命。把我们的电力结构要以化石能源为主，变成以可再生能源为主。在这个过程当中呢，你一定要这个淘汰落后的，发展这可再生能源。我们淘汰的这个火电机组1.2亿，什么概念？英国全国的这个装机容量不到1个亿，这就是这么一个概念。也就是说，我们确定的目标是非常艰巨的，而且呢，我们要努力要把它实现。另外呢，国外我们不再建这个煤电了。国外不建煤电，它有它的困难。全球在生态脆弱地区里生活的人33亿到35亿，而且有些国家现在连能源都没有。比如说我去尼泊尔，尼泊尔就很缺电，它这个首都大街上就没有路灯，只有总统府前面有几盏这个太阳能的这个路灯。是谁啊？是我们西藏自治区送给他们的。所以这就是说，如果要真正给它解决，必须有一个过程，这个过程要解决技术创新，要解决储能的问题，解决电网的安全问题、输配的问题。
所以我看到您说我们要只争朝夕，但是的确不是一朝一夕就能够一步到位的哈。陈来教授，从文化的角度，您也可以来解读一下，就是中国在人均 GDP 是一个中等收入国家的这个时候，做出了这种主动的调整，它意味着什么？
这个政策吧，也反映了中国的文化。从前有句话叫做“善为人先，不落事后”，就是好的事我们要争先，不管它短期内对我自己是不是有益，但是只要是好的是善的事，善为人先，不落事后，不能落后。但是在一个更大的共同体，人类的生存的共同体，人类的命运的共同体来看，是吧？这件事是必要的，是好的，那我就应该首先比别人更先去做这件事，这就叫善为人先。
And Susan and David, share with us some of, the inspirational stories that takes place around the world. What are some of the innovations, breakthroughs, new ideas, new solutions that you can share with us?
When I look at that chart that you had up, so many of the emissions relate to the food system. And I think that there's a huge unlocking of potential and innovation in food, both on the local level and in addressing global supply chain issues, innovations in refrigeration, all the different things that were listed. There's some really interesting entrepreneurs in China. There's David Young with Green Common. There's a lot of innovation funds in the United States looking at cellular agriculture, looking at plant-based innovation.
You have initiated a program called Kiss the Ground, which aims to sustain healthy soil, which is the basis for the food for human beings, basically. Have you achieved some encouraging progress on that?
I think it's, there's a real need to raise awareness about a lot of these chemicals and pesticides. Obviously, that was something that started with Silent Spring with Rachel Carson, who was my hero, who actually propelled the beginning of the environmental, grassroots environmental movement and the Environmental Protection Agency. But I think there's lots of renewed interest in regenerating soil. Some of the statistics say that in 60 years, we have 60 years left of topsoil, and we have to find ways to regenerate and make our soils more healthy and also mitigate against drought. If you have a healthier soil structure, it can retain more water. So there's a lot of benefits. And I think that it's something that David and I are interested in. We have a 2,000-acre farm in upstate New York. So we're trying on a personal level to actually apply these principles and also invest in companies that are actually addressing some of the global supply chain issues, because you obviously can't get everything locally. But how do you make a more efficient global food system more sustainable? And I think there's a lot of innovation happening.
So we need to use our science, not just for weapons of war, but for weapons of climate change, of curbing carbon emissions, of new vehicles, new technology, new ways of living, new values. That is a revolution. It is a transformation, and it can be done. It just takes understanding, insight, wisdom, and commitment on the part of people not in one part of the world, but in many parts of the world.
Thank you. 谢主任可以跟我们分享一下，最近一段时间您有没有听到一些能够让人感到很有信心的一些在科技和模式创新方面的举动呢？
其实现在这个转型创新呢，已经成了一个大的趋势，而且它也带来了一个大的市场、大的竞争的一个平台。这个，比如说这个节能、提高能源的利用效率，这个潜力非常大。现在这个可再生能源，我们除了光伏发电、这个水力发电、这个风力发电、潮汐发电，还有这个生物智能发电之外，现在呢又有了一个氢能。氢能就是氯氢，通过可再生能源电解水产生氢。现在还有一个概念呢，就是循环经济。也就是说，那潜力也很大，它又造就出一个新的产业，带来新的就业机会。真正要技术创新，它是可以解决很多问题的。另外呢，还要制度创新。所以在减排这个问题上，政府的责任就是确定目标，出台鼓励性的、限制性的和禁止性的政策，特别是经济政策。经济政策作为杠杆，它可以撬动你投入1可以撬动10%的这个作用。所以这个
要靠市场的机制去运作，
靠市场的机制去运作，还要发挥企业家的作用。所以这些问题，只要制度上、技术上进行创新，大家有政治意愿，很多问题啊，
这是全社会的意愿，
全社会的意愿。只要你这个努力了，而且呢还要国际合作，这要做到了，就把不可能争取变成可能，这就是靠大家的努力。
所以其实我们都是在一条船上啊，每一个人都需要做出自己的努力和改变。在今天节目的最后呢，我也想请4位嘉宾都展望一下啊，到了2060年，你期待我们现在所处的这个地球，或者是人和自然的关系啊，达到一个什么样的水平 ？Governor Brown.
Well, I think it's going to be much better. It's going to be much better because human beings will have wiped themselves out or diminished themselves greatly by some horrible set of catastrophes, or we will get wise and create a sustainable form of living on the earth with nature.
Thank you so much. Susan and David.
I think rather than saying we need to take away our pleasures, What I think we need to work on is to transform our pleasures from purchasing pleasures to spiritual, artistic, and natural pleasures. And that will be a world in 2060 we can all be proud of.
I would love to see more understanding of beauty, more understanding of the arts, more understanding of self-reliance. I love the idea of understanding that we live in reciprocity to each other and to all sentient beings, and to live with a practice of gratitude and to understand our interdependence, and that we will have more opportunities to live into a more creative and potential for all humans and living things.
陈来教授，2060年你希望看到的世界是怎样的？
中国呢，现在已经把生态文明建设已经定为国家发展的一个重要方面，所以呢，我期待呢，在未来像2060年，应该能够实现我们古人的这种理想，入之有时，取之有度，用之有节，对待自然资源这种平衡的、节制的、有序的这样一个状态，给人类呢带来更多的幸福。
谢主任，
我是干什么吆喝什么，所以我是希望2060年这个全球实现气候变化这个巴黎协定所确定的目标，也就是2度以内力争1.5度这个目标，实现碳中和。另外呢，我希望这个地球更好，人与自然的关系更和谐，给我们的子孙后代留下一个这个可持续、永续发展的这么一个地球。
好，非常感谢各位嘉宾啊！应对气候变化是全球的共同挑战，也很有可能成为我们共同发展的历史机遇。有一组数字会给大家带来积极的信号啊！在这个地球上，谁是最担心或者最关心气候变化的呢？联合国开发计划署在2021年的调查涉及全球50个国家120万名受访者，他得出的结论是，年轻人是最关注这个话题的人群。这项呢被号称是有史以来最大规模的关于气候变化的民意调查，指出呢，2/3的人认为气候变化是全球的紧急事件。他们都希望在气候变化的问题上立刻采取行动，而这个调研也给了我们对于未来的积极期待。气候变化正在从一个政府命题变为一个公民的行动，寻找和创建可持续的发展之路是人类共同的决定，它是经济的决定，是政治的决定，而根本上是文明的决定，需要每一个人的加入。好，感谢你收看本期的文化相对论，我们下期见。也感谢我们的各位嘉宾。文化相对论当中的相对一词有2重含义，一是每个民族每个国家有自己的文化根性，二是我们的交流互鉴能够彼此启发并且带来合作。欢迎各位。
推动这件事儿，就是为了我们这个地球的未来。
The poverty is many diseases, just like cancer.
You change one thing, it has so many unforeseen consequences.
Globalization has come, so here is a challenge.
中国在1000年以前就做到了这一点。It is a totally different culture.
我们应该遵循自然的发展。
Nothing against the grain.
希望能看到各个国家的年轻人能够在一起去解决我们人类面临的问题。